love the old Hollywood studio system films where you had so many different genres, westerns, adventure, and thrillers. And I'd always really wanted to see if I could do, let's say, a thriller or do a western or that sort of thing. And that was one of the main attractions, the possibility of trying to work within a certain convention, a certain genre, and to not only try to do what we would call today like a psychological thriller, but to kind of bring something more to it, to give it another edge, another viewpoint, something that may come from my other films, let's say, another approach to a psychological thriller, without trying to change the general appearance of a thriller, to keep the tradition alive, I'd hope, making these type of...
Originally, Spielberg came to me, and he was interested in directing, and then somehow he dropped out, and then he and I talked to some other directors about it, and nobody seemed to either want to do it or had another commitment, and so over this period of time, I would from time to time give it to Marty once or twice, and then finally we had a reading right here, and everybody was here, Marty, Spielberg, and everybody involved, trying to get one reading of another version written by Wesley Strick.
There was a read-through of the script in New York that Steven Spielberg had organized, and I just sat in the audience and watched it. I think Kevin Kline played the Sam Bowden part, and I think Phoebe Cates played the girl. Bob De Niro was Max. I think it was very much done as a kind of showcase for Bob to show Marty that this was an interesting project for them to collaborate on.
They were after me to do it for a while, and I wasn't interested in it. The original Cape Fear is a perfect B film, in a sense, a perfect film noir, and you can't do that again. That was a statement that was made at that time for that culture and that time and place. And so what would I do with that story?
In my mind, I thought it would never happen. It didn't seem like Scorsese's material at all. And so I didn't put any stock in it.
I told him I really don't like the script, and Steven looked at me and said, well, you could change it. And I said, well, yeah, I could do that. I hadn't thought of it because I was working on Goodfellas. I was too busy. I don't want to be bothered,
I kept saying, look, you got to do it because it seems that every time we come back, it's just a matter of time. So it shows that you should do this movie.
And then a few weeks later, to my amazement, my agent called and said, we think that Scorsese's going to do the picture. Can you fly to New York and talk to him about the script? I said, sure. And even at that stage, I didn't believe it would happen. But I was happy to go to New York and sit in a room with him. I'd never actually really spoken to him. So there we were with De Niro, too, the three of us sitting in some office in a kind of marathon meeting, and went from page 1 to page 125, I think it was. And he had, again to my amazement, read it with a great deal of attention. And he asked me to remove scores of details and moments and lines of dialogue, and almost every one was one that I put in with Steven Spielberg in mind. Those sorts of touches, those kind of bigger pieces of showmanship. Marty continually would say, Steven does that beautifully. I don't do that. I work on a much smaller canvas. And once I sort of removed all the other things that were making him nervous, then we started to focus on the thing that I guess most interested him. And that was the family tension, the Bowdens themselves and their domestic misery. The family, I think, had always, in my versions, had been unhappy. But Marty wanted to devote a lot of time and attention to the details of their unhappiness. So we examined the scenes of discord between Sam and Lee, and also between Sam and his daughter.
And that's when I started to get excited, and then I said we should go forward. And it was also a picture that I had owed to Universal because of the support and the production and the support on the final release of Last Temptation of Christ. So I decided I'd try and make the film. Films we went to see as kids, you see, and that was the enjoyment there. And we wanted to know how much we appreciated it.
They said, would you like to play a cameo role? And they offered 3, the assistant district attorney, the judge, and there's a Bible-spouting, hypocritical Southern lawyer. And I said, that's the part for me. That's the one I want to play. So it was just a thorough pleasure to go down to Fort Lauderdale. Marty is so sure-handed. I think I did my cameo role in one day, and it was a great pleasure to work with De Niro and with Nick Nolte. I've told Marty several times and Bob De Niro that it was one of the most satisfying days' work that I can remember. When I meet Marty, I say to him, well, that was nice, but what have you done for me lately? Have you got another cameo role for me? It was a great pleasure to work with him.
Stand by. Ready, everyone?
We needed to shoot the movie someplace in the South, but someplace where we could pick up a local crew as well as bring people so that we could keep the budget in line. So we scouted in Florida, and we decided that Fort Lauderdale was probably a good place to base. We also had a lot of cooperation there from the city.
I was very lucky, you know. I looked at house after house after house for this picture, and towards the end, just near, well, really the deadline, I found this place by the airport.
It was a very unusual house, actually. It was, I think it was for sale or for rent. It was not in great repair.
It needed a lot of changing inside, and so I revamped the whole interior. Gee, we did a lot of work there. And you know, I only had a month to get this ready. I added a lot of shutters. The stairway had an iron railing, and I changed it to wood. I re-wallpapered, I repainted.
But it still doesn't excuse what he does, by any stretch of the imagination.
You know, when I was in the bucket, all I could think about was busting out and killing somebody. I wanted to kill him with my bare hands, slow.
I'd seen the original, I liked it. I liked the idea of the revenge and all that, and this sort of single-mindedness to get this person like a heat-seeking missile locking in on somebody and just wanting to get even, you know. I thought that's a pretty clear, simple thing, you know.
Well, that was the key thing in that Bob, once he had that in his head, but the man just kept coming along, coming straight at the characters and coming straight at the characters until he finally works out that confrontation, that the body had to be shaped. And I always said it had to be shaped. When he said he was getting himself pumped up, in my mind, it had to be, his body had to be a lethal weapon, just in and of itself. I think he would get up, it went on for months. He would get his body in shape for months. I think he was on, about 2:30 in the morning he would get up and work out with Dan Harvey, his physical trainer, under strict supervision for about 4 or 5 hours, and then come to the set. And then go to sleep, like I guess around 9 o'clock or whatever, but then basically get some sleep, but really work out, eat very, very particular foods, and he would get his muscles and his body in such a way that it was just perfect for the film. And we kept the scenes which showed his body the most for the very end, so that he can get his muscles pumped up as much as possible for those particular scenes.
And then I was somebody who was actually working on a speech with me, Sam Schwa, who was helping me, had some kind of ideas that I said, this is pretty interesting what he's saying, you know, and the Bible, and then I tell Marty, and then we'd sort of work on that. Then Wesley would work with us.
There was a point where the night before each big scene, Bob would leave a message on my, at the hotel, please to have 3 or 4 or 5 different quotes ready if he in case he felt that he wanted to use them. It became a very important stylistic tick for him as a character. He didn't always use them, but he wanted them at hand.
Wesley Strick was very helpful. It was the first time I think I had a writer on the set, actually. And that's a situation where we kept rewriting all the way through, much more improvisation in a way than Taxi Driver, for example, in Cape Fear. Improvisation, but worked within a script. In other words, scenes were written a week or 2 in advance, sometimes a few days in advance. And it seemed to work all right.
There was not a lot of rehearsal, if I remember correctly. I mean, with Bobby, there was never any conversation beforehand. That's just the way he likes to work, and actually it's the way I like to work too, so that everything is new and it's a surprise. There hasn't been an intellectual discussion about how you're going to work or what you're going to do. It has a kind of an electricity. And Marty is the same way, really. He just creates a wonderful kind of enthusiastic atmosphere to work in, but he doesn't over-direct the actors.
That was great, that was great, that was great. But Nick, it looked like Juliette was helping you. I mean, I swear it did at one point. But whatever works, you know, whatever works.
You basically work with Marty by fitting into his filmmaking, understanding the way he's going to work. And so you bring what you can into that style and work within that. And that's always a challenge.
And action.
He has this extraordinary kind of almost childlike enthusiasm for the process of this thing of filmmaking and actors and creating. I mean, he's a wonderful person to be around.
I was really young and hadn't developed a process yet on which or how I work. So I sort of had this raw talent that I didn't know. So he was the first director I got with that just validated me, because before that, I'd only been hindered or stopped. He just let me be, and that was the genius of Marty, is that he'll accommodate how each actor works. You couldn't get more diverse than De Niro, Nick Nolte, Jessica Lange, and me. It's completely different, and he knows exactly how to work and get the best out of each actor.
Marty's very tough about what he will allow up on the screen in terms of acting, very, very tough. He just has a gut instinct about what's good, which he says he learned from sitting in a movie theater as a young boy with his friends, and if they laughed at something on the screen that they weren't supposed to be laughing at, he learned a great deal there, what was valid and what was not, what worked on the big screen and what didn't. And particularly what is truthful to human emotions is something Marty is just brilliant at knowing.
Cool about this man.
When the fireworks shots were done, they photographed De Niro against a blue screen. He was to be composited in with a series of fireworks. My understanding initially wasn't to be such a heavily orchestrated fireworks sequence. I thought, oh, well, you know, it'd be nice, just a few fireworks over his shoulder. And I kept hearing, no, he needs more, add more, add more. And finally, I talked to Marty on the phone one day, and I told him, well, I've got fireworks going forward, I've got fireworks going backward, I've got flat fireworks, I've got scope fireworks, so they were spreading, everything. And he said, that's great, put more. So what ended up in the movie is just a ton of fireworks.
There are impossible colors in there too. Dave took some of the firework elements and made black and whites out of them so that he could filter colors into the black and whites that real pyrotechnics can't create. There's a particular vivid green in there that's beyond what real pyro can do. But again, you know, realism wasn't the foremost concern.
In Cape Fear, I decided that I'd try to use widescreen for the first time, real widescreen, true anamorphic. And the reason I hadn't done that for years, I wanted every film in widescreen, but the problem is the panning and scanning on television. So I decided to take a chance. Maybe the wider screen TVs would be coming in a little sooner. So now it's 1999, and we're still waiting for them. In a year or two, maybe the TV screens will stretch, but it's happening. I always wanted to work with Freddie Francis. As a cinematographer, he's amazing. The Innocents is an extraordinarily photographed film. Sons and Lovers is beautifully photographed. And then, of course, he did the two films with David Lynch, Dune, I think, and, of course, The Elephant Man. And he had worked with Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger on Tales of Hoffman. I liked the films he directed as a horror film director, a thriller director. He understood mood, he understood angles, uses of lenses, and we had a really good time working with him.
The scene in which Kate...
It sometimes can take a lot of work to get something, all the various shots, and to put them together in the right rhythm with the right sound effect to give the scary effect, because it's not scary when we begin, believe me. It's like taking blocks and putting them together in a way that creates a mood.
In the end, I would say that it turned out to be a very effective piece of theater in a sense, because everything that Max does after that is so charged with menace. Specifically, the scene in which he seduces Juliette Lewis on the stage of the high school theater, I think would not have had the same intensity had we not seen what Max did to Ileana, what he was capable of doing. This kind of cannibalism, this barbaric thing. Every time he takes one step closer to her, I noticed in theaters people would gasp, and when he says, "Can I put my arm around you?" there was near hysteria. And I don't think the audience would have reacted with that kind of emotion had we not seen this earlier scene. The scene in the school auditorium was probably the big, I think, conceptual breakthrough that Marty and I made when we were developing the script together. Because prior to that, I had had a scene that was just a kind of rehash of the scene in the original film in which Robert Mitchum chases the little girl through the school.
They had a version of the script with Wesley that they literally had him the girl being terrorized. He walking down a hall, and he begins to chase her, and it became a cliffhanger. She was literally hanging off a window shade, and the staples in the window shade started to break. And would she fall down 2 stories? And eventually she's saved. And I said, you know, the funny thing is I like watching scenes like that, and I love movies like that, but I couldn't direct it.
The idea was to make it more insidious, to try and sort of seduce her in a way and get hold of her and control her, and that would really, you know, then that's a much more severe, to say the least, way of getting revenge on the father.
I said, I think that there might be some possibility of doing this picture if that scene is translated into a scene in which the girl loses all the trust that she had left for the father by Max Cady, through Max Cady's manipulations and mind games that he plays with a very quiet dialogue scene. And in that scene, she should be completely undone just by talking. And it took a while to write that scene.
Because your dad is not happy. Your mom is.
A scene that became a kind of template. And again, because of my habit of being economical, it was probably only about 2 or 3 pages long. Then one Saturday, the Saturday before the scene shot, Marty and I and De Niro and Juliette went to the actual set. And they started to do the scene and interpolate their own dialogue. And as they did that, I started to write all the best stuff that they were saying. And we did it 3 or 4 or 5 times. It goes against the conventions of the genre to stop, in a sense, stop a movie like this for that sort of prolonged dialogue scene. And yet, it's probably the centerpiece of the movie and the most original scene in the film, and maybe the most interesting. And the most perverse, certainly, especially insofar as it climaxes with De Niro putting his thumb into Juliette's mouth, which was Bob's idea. That did not come out of our rehearsal. I think he knew he was going to do it, but didn't tell Juliette.
The thumb thing was a surprise. I didn't want to do it until we did it. I think I told Marty I'm going to try that or something. Or I said, I'm just going to try something, you know.
That day, that morning, he said, I have an idea, it's a little crazy. I said, well, what is it? He said, well, it's this. I said, well, yeah, let's try that. That's good. Let's see what happens. So I shot 2 cameras. And I think basically the scene is, the second half of the scene, the tighter shots, were basically all one take. It just happened. It was very like theater.
And I think that Marty is the very first take of Bob doing that. And you read the surprise on her face, and it's genuine.
Do you mind if I put my arm around you?
Originally, when we were scouting, we found a river that we thought we could use that was very calm. And we hadn't planned on using a tank.
They took me down and showed me where they wanted to do this. It was an inlet. Well, you know, there's a big tide down there. So part of the day, you know, there's hardly any water in there. And then the water comes in. And I say, if we'd ever tried to do this down, well, we couldn't have done it. But if I had been silly enough to say, well, we can do it, we'd be shooting there yet, I think, you know. Because these things you have to have on a stage where you can control them. I mean, it's absolutely necessary.
So we built a tank, which sounds a lot more sophisticated than it is. It's really like a large swimming pool. The city of Fort Lauderdale gave us some property, and we built what was a big cement swimming pool.
The tank was about 90 feet by 100 feet, 7 foot deep. That's a lot of water, you know. And we had to build a ramp into it so we could get the boat in and out. It was quite involved.
And then we put metal roof over it with sides. It was sort of like a very rough airplane hangar. It was very, very basic, didn't have any soundproofing, and didn't also have much ventilation. We put some big fans, but we didn't have air conditioning. So it was kind of, it was rough.
I had a reel boat that I used out in a lake near our stage to do the matte shots. That was a matte shot, you know, as part of that was painted. I had a wonderful greensman, Al Meridian was his name, and he set up a whole little nursery outside the stage. And I had some very good on-set nursery men, the dressers. And, you know, every shot they had to move things around.
That was sort of arduous. Every day going to work, because we're all dirty at that point, and it was all very dramatic. So you literally, like, walk in and you knew you were about to shoot, like, screaming and terror and fear in 5 minutes. You know what I mean? So I'd watch Jessica Lange and De Niro at one point. You know, they'd jump up and down or do push-ups. And I was like, oh, that's when I observed what preparation was. Like, oh, maybe I should get the blood circulating a little bit to have some energy.
All right, are we ready?
Swimsuit edition.
Let's shoot.
Yeah, let's get it over.
The more physical the role, the better I like it. Just because I find it easier working when the character has a kind of a big physical existence. It's tiresome, but at the same time, I find that it's a great release for energy, as opposed to playing a character who's very kind of still and withheld.
As opposed to the original film, we sort of ran out of music. And Elmer said he had loved the original score of Torn Curtain, which hardly anyone had heard.
We included music that Herman had written for another film. We used music that he had written for Torn Curtain. That was an unused score. He had written the music for Torn Curtain, but they never used it. What happened between Hitchcock and Herman, as I know the story, Hitchcock told Herman that in Torn Curtain he wanted a romantic score. Herman had done a lot of pictures for Hitchcock, and Herman didn't see it that way. And after their discussions, Hitchcock arrived on the scoring stage that morning to find that the orchestra consisted of 16 French horns, 12 flutes, 9 trombones, and any number of percussion instruments. And of course he heard the music, which is anything but romantic. And they had an unpleasant, shall we say, a fight of some sort. They canceled the scoring date after the first 3 hours, I believe. I don't think they even went the whole day. And that was the end of their relationship. And as a matter of fact, it was effectively the end of Herman working here in the United States. Shortly thereafter, he left and spent the rest of his life in England.
Another name over the years that I thought was so extraordinary in movies, particularly he had worked in the 50s, was Saul Bass.
Saul himself, before he started working with Elaine, created some of the greatest title sequences ever in film history. Marty had always been a huge fan of his, but had no idea that he could work with him. And finally, when he found out that he was still doing titles and we contacted him, it began a fantastic relationship.
I discovered he was still working when, in 1990, I was finishing Goodfellas. And we were having trouble with how the word Goodfellas should appear on the screen. Not where it should appear. We knew that. But how it should come on the screen. And I said, let's go to the best, you know. He's still working. Let's ask him. And he was working with his wife at the time, Elaine, and they came up with a wonderful solution.